Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure on behalf of the panel to once again welcome you to our program, and it certainly is my pleasure this evening to welcome as our guest Jackie Kuntzman, who is visiting with us on our campus to speak to our students tomorrow and has been most gracious to agree to appear on this program and be quizzed by our panel. Our guest grew up in western Nebraska and later in life moved to the state of Oregon. In fact, she lives in Corvallis, Oregon. She reared her family there and then returned to school. She is a graduate of Lynn Benton Community College, and after that has pursued her education at Oregon State University, majoring in psychology. While pursuing an academic career, our guest has also been most involved in the movement for equality for women and what women face in contemporary society. It's a pleasure having you on our program.
Thank you.
I also tonight am honored to welcome back one of our regular panel members. On my far left is Mary Lou Reed, who has been with us for many programs now. As to background, Mrs. Reed has a degree from Mills College, a bachelor's degree. Following that, she attended graduate school studying in the field of religion at Columbia University in New York City. Welcome back, Mary Lou Reed.
Thank you, Tony.
Also, it's a pleasure having on our program as a guest panelist and a person who has been with us before, Mr. Bob Brown, who is a graduate of Texas Tech University in the field of political science. At the present time, he serves in the capacity as Job Placement Director for the Vocational School at North Idaho College. Bob, it's a pleasure having you on the program again.
Thank you, Tony.
And it's my pleasure to welcome for the first time as a visiting panel member tonight, Ms. Peggy Fedge, who is with us at North Idaho College. Her background includes a bachelor's degree from the University of North Dakota. She has a master's degree in foreign languages from Washington State University, and she also has a master's degree in counseling and guidance, a second master's degree from Washington State University. At the present time, she serves in the counseling department at North Idaho College. Welcome to our program.
Thank you, Tony.
We'll proceed to questions at once, and the first question this evening from Mrs. Reed.
Jackie, the question of what women do other than have babies, it concerns all of us. And in your case, you had 4 children and then returned to college. Could you share with us some of the fears and anxieties and insecurities that you felt after having been at home with your children and upon returning to school? Were you worried about going back to school and how you would fit in and how you would do?
I was worried about how I was going to get registered even.
All the details.
I hadn't gone to high school at all. And so it was really frightening to me. And I didn't want to take that GED test. My husband had degrees and works at the mental health clinic, and everybody just assumed that the woman he was married to must have gone to some kind of school. So, yeah, it was frightening. It was frightening to go out there and admit that I didn't even have a high school degree. And once I got there, it was scary. What was I going to do about the children? And was I neglecting my house? And was my husband going to leave me? And all sorts of things.
Do you think most women in your circumstances have the same feeling of really being frightened about how they're going to perform both at home and at school when they go back like that?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of women tell me that they went out 5 times before they were even ready to register.
Because it was scary. Did you found, though, some comfort after a while that there you were in school and you were able to do well, and all those years you had been doing some other kind of learning too, is that right?
Oh yeah, I wasn't dead, you know, I was still learning.
Great.
Yeah.
Mr. Brown.
I was wondering, not being in high school, perhaps you didn't see this, but when you started college, did you have any experience with counselors who would counsel or try to counsel you into traditional roles? They say when you first went to college, assuming that you were not sure what you wanted to do, did you have trouble with counselors in trying to convince them that you didn't want to be a nurse or a secretary or something like that?
I decided not to go to a counselor at all because I thought they'd make me take a GED. And so I just enrolled for classes. and got away with it for a while. And then I met a counselor while I was having lunch in the cafeteria and started telling her that you shouldn't be telling people to go into the nursing program and the secretarial program, and she agreed with me, and that's how I got acquainted with counselors and found them, they really weren't doing that. They were really neat people.
Ms. Betty.
Obviously, you stayed in school once you got there, despite all the apprehensions you're talking about. What was it that made you stay? Why didn't you walk out?
First of all, I took classes that I thought I could succeed in. I took family living because I thought if there's anything I know about, it's that. And I took psychology because that's my husband's field and he likes to lecture me, and so I thought there's something I could do. And the first term I had all A's, and then I had lots of confidence. Also, the teachers were really, really helpful. I think a small college like this is the kind of college I went to. And it was just so helpful to have teachers that, some of them I knew before I went to school. And they were, if not friends, at least acquaintances, and they became friends while I was in school, that you could call them by their first names. At my age, I don't want to call a woman my age by your last name and give, you know, the kind of traditional things that you think about in education. I didn't want, because it lowered my status, and I was really guarding my status closely because it was tied to my identity.
Mrs. Reed.
Well, now, did I miss something? Whatever happened to the GED problem?
Oh,
You said you got away with it for a while. Did they finally catch up with you and say, you've got to take this?
The dean of students came to me one day and said, you have to take this GED because you're going full-time. And I resisted and resisted, and finally we had an agreement. And I signed his paper that I would take the GED someday, and he signed my paper that I wouldn't have to.
Would you recommend this as a course for most people? Have you heard since that maybe the GED is not that difficult? Or do you think that perhaps just going ahead and starting college actually is the way to go, because most people who can succeed in college will automatically...
I think any way you can get yourself in school. You know, if you can't bring yourself to take the GED and you can get in without it, then do it. If you can take the GED and it doesn't just wipe you out, then take it, because it's not that big a deal. I'm sure. I wouldn't know because I haven't taken it, but I'm sure it's not. If you can make it in college, surely you can do the GED thing.
Why do you think you got all A's? You were obviously an intelligent woman, but did you feel that you had some advantage that made it easier for you to succeed?
Sure, because I had been married for 22 years. My husband had degrees. He went to school for 8 years after we were married, and all the time he was going to school, I was learning from him. And my father has an education, and all the people I know have educations, and I've learned from them. If I hadn't had that opportunity, I wouldn't have done that well in school.
I think this is very encouraging to women to recognize the fact that they have not wasted the years that they are raising the children.
Sure. Gee, you just can't live for all those years and not have learned anything.
Isn't that neat?
Mr. Brown.
I was wondering, the National Organization for Women has called for a strike on October the 29th, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with this, but my understanding is that they are urging women that are working outside the home to not go to work that day, and the women that are working inside the home, the housewife, the mother, to really sort of take the day off and indicate to the world how much we depend on women. I think it's called Alice Doesn't is the name of the day from the movie Alice Doesn't Live Anymore, I suppose. And I was wondering if you'd like to comment on that. Or
Yeah, I've been thinking about it for about 2 hours, off and on. And I have really ambivalent feelings about it, but right now I'm inclined to think that it's a worthwhile thing for women to do. And if the telephones don't work, and if women really do stay home, maybe then the country really will see that women are doing really important work. Lots of restaurants would close down if women didn't come in, and where is everybody going to eat?
Alice's restaurant, I'm sure, is closed.
Ms. Spaggi.
What we're talking about here, I think, is feminism. Could you tell us, what do you think of when you think of feminism? What is your definition of feminism?
Oh, feminism means so many things to so many people, but to me it's really a personal thing. It means not having only one choice in life. It gives me a lot of different choices. It means you can relate to other women as people and friends instead of as competition for one man. And it's an exciting thing for me. I guess most of all it means that I don't have to stay home after my children start to school. You could just lay there and rot in that house, you know. But I can go back to school, I can go to work, and I can stand up for myself in the world.
Thank you.
Ms. Reed.
Well, there are several movements that are counter to women's lib. One I was reading about is called Total Woman.
Oh, yes.
And this is evidently geared for the women who do not want to be freed from their husbands, or they want to continue to be subservient, they want to stay home. What do you feel motivates these women? And what do they find threatening in women's lib? And can you kind of identify with them too, perhaps, if you had not been able to make the break? Is that too many questions all in one?
No, I think I could have been a total woman at one time, you know, or at least driven for that. And I think it's our conditioning. And I saw a woman speaking on the Total Women on television one evening, and she said that she had met her husband at the door wrapped in saran wrap and nothing else. And I thought that was very appropriate.
Perhaps you should explain just a little bit further what you understand the Total Woman movement to be, because I'm not really that well versed on it, but it is strictly that women should be fluffy and feminine.
Yeah, and you stomp your foot if you don't get your way, and you fluff your hair, and you act coy, and it's really a devious way, I think, to behave. I don't want to be devious with men. I want to be straightforward and honest with them and open, and I don't want to have to be coy and cute to get my way.
Well, why do you suppose women are taken by this devious method?
Because our society tells us that we're going to be yielding to men, and it's a powerful kind of thing in a way. We can have power over men by being their cute, fluffy little thing that controls them from behind the scenes.
Using them, so to speak.
Really.
Can you contrast this with how you feel that the feminist movement approaches men?
I think feminists, of course, there are lots of different kinds of people that are feminists, and there are women who are homosexual and everything, but for myself, it gives me the freedom to approach men as an equal and as an honest human being, just as another person. And if I need something from a man, I can be straightforward and say directly what I want and not have to be coy and fluffy about it, or try to manipulate him into doing something that maybe he doesn't even want to have anything to do with.
What about mystery in the sense of costume and all this bit? The saran wrap and the cowboy outfit and bubble bath.
What you really are is so much better and exciting than what you can pretend to be.
Thank you.
Mr. Brown.
There have also been a lot of good things that come out of the feminist movement. One thing, recently, for the first time in history of this country, there have been 2 attempted assassinations on the President of the United States, and they both have been by women. Do you see any correlation between the feminist movement and the fact that suddenly we're seeing now women assassins, or attempted assassins, I should say?
I don't know, but as women get more involved in politics and more interested in what's happening in the nation at higher levels, then maybe you're going to have more women who are violent.
Do you think that the feminist movement, produced this, or just that it's something that's coming out of women that have been sort of held back?
I don't think that the women's movement is producing that. I think they're just, these women probably would have been violent in some way, maybe, but they chose to put their violence on the president because they were involved politically. And at one time they would not have been involved politically, and so they probably wouldn't have chosen the president to take it out on.
Ms. Fedge.
Oh, a question that would follow along with Mr. Brown's question is, there are those who say that if women were running our country or in positions of power, that there wouldn't be the wars, we wouldn't have the corruption in government that we have seen in the past. Would you like to comment on that?
We won't know until we try. You know, you have to give women a chance and see what we can do.
I would like to interject, I should say, some questions, and being in the field of political science, I'm afraid mine are oftentimes oriented toward government policy and legislation. Before I do that, I would like to follow up on what Peggy had to say, though, about women in politics, and I see my role sometimes on this program also, too, as not attempting to reveal my own viewpoints, but play the devil's advocate and let the guests defend the position they're here for. When she mentioned that would there be any change in our political system as far as corruption if women had a greater voice in our government, such as what happened in Watergate, as we look back upon it, it was certainly instigated and carried out by men that were in that movement. But in world politics, women have been playing a much larger role. And I think of the leadership of India and its movement towards almost a totalitarian state, looks like, or at least authoritarian, and that's headed by a woman. So these types of things concerning corruption, is that confined to either sex, or are men and women already really equal in behavior as far as their ethical standards and so forth, some being directed towards what some of us classify as corruption, others very outstanding of both sexes? Are we really hitting the picture correctly when we say that men or women will be better or worse in a particular position such as government? How would you?
Well, I think India is an example of one woman having power in government. The women of India are not powerful in government and actually don't have very much to do with it.
Okay, the point that I'm pursuing with you is...
Yes, I understand your point, and I'm going to answer that.
Okay.
I really am. I think that when women first get the rights to be really involved in government in the United States, that they are going to be more honest. They're not going to have the corruption, and they're not going to get involved with wars right away. As time goes on, I think the whole country, I like to think the whole country is going to get more honest. I don't know which way it will go, but I think whatever direction women go, it will be the same way all people go. And so I don't think it will make any difference. Eventually.
What are the reasons for women being more, or let me put it this way, women being less corrupt than men in government? Why would it, what would sex have to do with it, no matter who? In other words, if a majority of members of Congress are women or men, for example, what's making the difference of one being less corrupt than the other?
I think because they'll be new to it, and it will be so challenging and exciting for them in the beginning that they will be less corrupt, because they want to really make some changes. And right now the women's movement is going pretty good in some places and kind of barely getting started in other places. And as the women's movement grows, women get so excited, and something new that they can do to use their strength and their powers. They use very positive parts of themselves. But I'm afraid that after it gets to be habit and commonplace for women and men to share in government, then everybody will go the same direction, and I hope it won't be toward more corruption and that it will be better.
May I pursue one more question on that line with
Sure.
you? Some of the great political philosophers that have written throughout history have dealt with the question of the nature of human beings, and those who were most biased and did not provide an equal role for women often talk about the nature of man, although they, I'm sure, were meaning nature of human beings. And one group contend that when you do obtain power, and as you say, use it for a while, that absolute power in particular tends to corrupt absolutely.
Right.
So were you taking the position that regardless of sex, that the danger really lies with giving too much power to one person or group?
So. Yes, I think that says it very well.
Okay. Mrs. Reed.
Well, are you saying, Jackie, that the position of women now in the women's movement is as a reform movement, and that we should really be aiming at changing the society?
Yes, absolutely.
Can you see how this is happening within the women's movement itself? You see, it's kind of faded from the topical scene. It is not really up front quite as much. And what is happening with the women's movement in an organizational fashion? Is that important, or has it now reached the level where it's all women moving together to change? Or is this going to come, as you see it, from an organized women feminist party and political change imposed by a women's party?
I think it takes lots of different forms. There are some political groups, political alternative groups for women, and the political caucus, Women's Political Caucus, NOW now, and there are large groups of people, women that do not belong to any organization, that are just going about trying to change their lives, and maybe talking to other women and identifying with the movement without being involved in any organization.
So this happens on many levels, as you see it.
And it takes all the different levels, I think.
But we're going to reform the world.
Maybe not reform the world, but reform our corner of it.
Do you see anyone among the women who are prominent in the political scene today, any one woman or any several women that you would say would be candidates to be, say, the first woman president? Do you have any favorites, or should I spring that on you?
Oh, I'm so bad at remembering names that I can't remember her name right now, but the one from Texas.
Barbara Jordan?
Barbara Jordan. I love her, and I think she would just make a great president.
Along with being woman and black.
Right.
Could I just take one more minute to say why you think she would make a great president? What are these qualities that someone like Barbara Jordan has that reaches you?
I think she's really in touch with the ordinary American people, not just the rich and the powerful, but all levels of society. That's one thing in her favor. The other thing is that she is a lawyer, and she's really, really bright. And another thing, I saw her in the Watergate hearings and some things like that, and I was just so impressed with her integrity.
I have to pass this along to the Texan on the panel, because I don't think he can stand it.
Just talking about one of my favorite people with
Right.
it. Because there are quite a few Sissy Parenteau from Texas.
Yes.
I was wondering, kind of pursuing this a little bit, I frequently hear in discussions of, not maybe the first woman candidate for president, but women running for city council or county commissioners, what type of woman should be the first? And there are the two schools of thought. The one school that says, well, you need the frothy little bubble-headed giggler who will just charm the people, and then they'll say, well, she'll be all right to put on. And the other group says, no, you should have a very dynamic, intelligent, bright, sort of threatening person, because you don't want to put just a sham up. Would you like to comment on that as far as...
I don't think that a bright, dynamic woman should threaten the rest of the city councilmen if they are also bright. And I think the fluffy little woman may have something to offer, too.
Thank you.
Ms. Fedge.
This is somewhat along the lines of what we've already been talking about. What do you see as historically the woman's role in politics? And do you see a change from what it has been to what it is now? And if so, what is that change?
Historically, we've been letter stuffers, envelope stuffers, and folders, and mimeographers, and get out the vote thing and stomp around the precincts. And it's changing very slowly. Patsy Mink had a good following, but she had very little money, and she did a kind of a grassroots support effort, and it just wasn't enough.
I would like to follow this question because I think it's really interesting about what's happening in American politics and how it could be changing. Many groups we've talked about in our society that have been discriminated against are certainly listed as a minority, such as the black citizens of our country, because they were a minority of the population. In the case of women, we're really talking about a majority of the total population of our country. Yet when you do view the elections for the U.S. Senate and the House and governorships and so forth, very few women win. There's no women in the United States Senate, and I believe there's 17 or 18 women in the House out of 435. One lady that is a governor out of 50. Why don't more women win that seek office, since the majority of the population certainly can be classified as women, and certainly there are many men that I know and associate with that are most in agreement with the rights for both sexes and aren't discriminatory, why aren't more women winning?
We have always, like forever and ever in this society, it seems to me, we've always seen men as powerful, intelligent, aggressive people. And we've seen women as submissive, quiet, and don't get involved in those kinds of things. And we think that women can't get out of their home, you know, and have a career in politics and also take care of their families. And we don't want some woman in politics that's not taking care of her family. And so I think that's why we vote for men. But I think it's changing. More and more women are voting for women. But I think we have to vote. We also have to take in consideration the candidates. And sometimes women that are running for office, there have been a few that I wouldn't vote for.
Ms. Reed.
Well, what about the children? Well, you have to return to the children. You went back to school and you were guilty. Did they survive?
Oh, my children just flourished when I started back to school. It was especially good for my daughters.
And did the guilt rapidly disappear?
No.
Is the guilt gone yet?
I think there are twinges of it yet, and especially if I meet someone that says, gee, I just couldn't stand to go off and leave my children like that. I just love them too much. You know, then it's hard for me to convince that woman then that I also love my children, and I love them too much to stay at home.
Why do you think your daughter flourished when you left?
Oh, because she saw herself in a different way. I have a daughter that's 11, and she's pretty heavy set. And in fact, she's pretty fat. And kids kind of teased her, but she's really very bright. And when she began to see herself as being a bright person and pursuing a college education and some kind of a career, then she began to lose a little weight, and being fat didn't bother her. And she's losing weight lickety-split.
Well, had you been... Do you think you were an overprotective mother and that you had been perhaps too overwhelming in the scene?
No, I don't think I was, but I think what I was doing was passing on to my children the same kind of conditioning that I grew up with, and even conditioning that I didn't believe in. You know, and I'm not doing that anymore.
Well, when you're counseling now, the question is not so much should women work, but how are they going to work? Because more and more women are trying to pursue the career and raise a family. And how do you feel about the daycare center situation, and how do you counsel your younger friends about their child raising?
The daycare problem is really a problem in lots of places. In our town, it's not so bad. We have quite a few really good daycare centers. And also, I don't think that a woman has to go out and pursue a career. I think there are lots of women that want to stay home, and they want to raise their children and take care of their house, and they're contented with that. And I think that's great if that's their choice. I think what I want them to have is a choice, and not that they have to do one thing or the other. And I think it's too bad that we put down housekeeping and child care. Those are really important things to do in this world. And if they are important things to do, why aren't we giving women good feedback for the jobs they're doing with their families and their homes? And you can be so creative in a home. Many women are, and they like it and they dig it, and so why not let them do it? If they're satisfied with it and their family's satisfied with it, that's a worthwhile thing to do.
But how do you reinforce this at the same time that one says it's great for women to get out and do their own thing? How do you have these two concurrent things that will build women's feeling about themselves without?
Well, I think one way to do it is for society to start not saying, oh, you're just a housewife, you know, and talking about coffee clubs. Oh, you know, the women in my neighborhood get together in a coffee club. Coffee clubs are really important to women that are home all day, and they talk about really important things. They talk about, what do you do when your kid isn't toilet trained at age 3? What do you do if your kid breaks out in a rash in the middle of the night, should you call the doctor or should you not call the doctor? They talk about all kinds of things. Where are the best bargains? If that's your job to do the shopping and do the house cleaning and take care of children, then it's important to know where are the bargains and what do you do about your kid right now.
So this isn't wasting time. This is
It's not
on-the-job training.
Right, and we need to recognize that and not put women down for what they're doing. And we need to have women that are pursuing a career going on television and saying it's okay to be a housewife. It's a neat thing to do if that's what your choice is.
Is the choice to be also total woman? I mean, being the housewife, does the housewife need to have this kind of reinforcement of that kind of image?
Well,
Can she be a straightforward one, too?
I think she has to be. She has to be for her own mental health, I think. There are lots of women that stay home all day and play that part and just get nervous and have to go to the hospital for a couple of days to get over the trauma of just being there. It's really uncomfortable to try to live a life as though you are somebody else. And so I hope all women, if they choose to be housewives or not, will just be themselves and be honest.
Mr. Brown.
Since I'm sure that many of our viewers will have been watching baseball and football this afternoon and then tune to the show in the evening, for all the athletic fans, the Title IX, which is the new educational act, one of the things that you hear most often, at least I hear from men, is that the Title IX, which is eliminating discrimination in education, that this is going to kill college football, it's going to kill high school basketball, that these things will just evaporate. Do you have any comments on that? Or
Yeah, I think they're going to be replaced with women tennis players. I don't know, but I hope so. I think that they are not going to be hurt all that much. And if they are hurt all that much, then maybe that's the way it has to be. Maybe it's worthwhile for all the students to have these kinds of athletic opportunities. And if football has to be, if it has to fall by the wayside, it's okay, because theoretically these programs are to improve the health and physical condition of our youthful people. And if we're going to do that, well, then it's for women too.
I know that when I was in high school, of course, the boys had the big three: football, baseball, and basketball. And then when I grew up and became a man, had a family, I couldn't have enough kids to form a basketball team or a football team or a baseball team, so I found that in my case it's difficult for me to play sports with my family because I was not taught golf and tennis and hiking and the kinds of things you can do with a family. Did you find this, say, in your family, that your husband was difficult for him to sort of adjust this way? Or
I don't know. I've never been involved in sports. When I was a little girl, you didn't get dirty and you didn't play sports, and I never got to be good at them. And my husband loves sports, and he likes to play ping pong and billiards and almost anything that two people can play. And I'm not any competition, and I get tired of losing, so I don't want to play this game if I can't win once in a while. Yeah, he has a problem.
May I interject a question here on the same subject while we're at it? I've talked to many women, and young women in particular, who are very involved in the whole question of discrimination for women in the movement, and they are having a debate among themselves that I very much appreciate being involved with, so I can ask them some questions. And one group, or one school of thought from some of those women, is that really there's no major difference in physical endurance of men and women. It's just been conditioned over the centuries, and they contend if we will change our whole concepts that women can do anything men can, which I would interpret to mean someday football also. And another school of thought is that no, there is some major physical differences, and therefore we may have to do what you've been talking about, re-emphasize certain sports as tennis, that certainly both men and women can play to, even in a competition with one another. Which school of thought would you belong to on this question of physical endurance?
I don't buy either one. I don't care which one's right. I think the thing to do is try it and find out. Let women do whatever they want to in sports, and then you'll know if they can do it or not.
Okay, thank you. And I have one more question before going back to the panel. This is along the same line. correct me if I'm in error, I think it's always very dangerous for someone who's not in a group to start trying to define the group's positions. A dear friend of mine who was black, one time I was trying to sympathize with some of the things he'd gone through, and he says, "Quit trying, you're not black." And so maybe that is a problem. But anyway, Lisa, I seem to think there's three schools of thought about where should we go from here in ending discrimination, or should we make any changes, should we leave life as it is? And some women I have talked to says, I don't want any change. I like it very much like it is, and I like to be pampered by the men and so forth. Then a second school of thought, and I appreciate this candidness of all these positions by people that I talk to, that they are frank about their positions. The second position is that, yes, we want to make some changes in our society, particularly such things as when a woman is working at an identical job with a man, and he's getting more money than she, which is happening very much throughout our society, that there should be equal pay for equal work, and those kind of reforms. But some of those women tell me, I don't want to extend that to where women be drafted if men are drafted, or I don't want women to pay alimony rather than men when they have more money than the husband when they're separating. Then the third school of thought, some women I talk to says, I want total equality. I want to forget any distinction whatsoever. Let women get equal pay for equal work, etc. Alimony is a question of the past, or depends on which one has the most money, we get it. Draft will be for everyone. Do you belong to either one of these three schools of thought?
Yeah, I guess I belong to the one that draft is for everyone. I think if a war is really worth fighting, then women should be in it. Actually, in wars, there are very often more civilians killed than there are soldiers. And if that's true, then women should have had guns to defend themselves. And if a war breaks out in my country, I'd like to have a gun, because when the enemy comes to my door, I want to be able to defend myself and my children. If you're talking about going over to Vietnam, then I don't want that war at all. So I think war is for everybody, or else it's for nobody. And I hope it's for nobody.
Then in defining equality or equal opportunity for each individual, regardless of sex, color, race, creed, and so forth, are you saying that we will really not reach a society of equal opportunity that we've been talking about since we've been a society? Even Thomas Jefferson talked about it in the Declaration of Independence. We will not reach it until we totally disregard these characteristics and say that the law and what is required of people in society is going to be the same for everyone. Is that the position?
Right. And I don't think we have to worry about having separate bathrooms and things like that. That's ridiculous. We can have separate bathrooms and still be equal. And a lot of silly little things like that. I can't think of any more examples, but those things aren't going to happen.
Thank you. Ms. Fedge.
A little while back, you were talking about the conditioning that you received and that you have passed on to your daughters, and Mr. Stewart was talking to you about your feelings on a woman's image. Along that line, do you think that we as women put up barriers for ourselves, especially in regard to self-image? And if you do, what do you think some of those barriers are?
Oh, sure I do. I think that we are conditioned to see ourselves in a certain way. I saw myself as a wife and mother and as a giver, and the woman behind the scenes. My husband would be a big success, and therefore I would be a big success. And I don't see myself that way anymore. And I don't want my daughters to see themselves that way anymore. The double sex standard is one I objected to when I was a teenager, but I put it on my daughters. And they've challenged me and my values just, as they've grown up, they've just challenged everything. And my two that are grown have changed my views so radically that I found I had a lot of values I could throw away.
How do you see yourself now as compared to back then, and how do your daughters see themselves now?
I see myself as being a woman who can support herself. And so if I live with a man, it will be out of choice and not because he is responsible for me and he has to stay there, and not because I am dependent on him and therefore I have to stay there. But as a woman who can support myself, who can take care of my own needs, and who can give myself to another person out of choice, that I can give myself to a man because I want to.
Thank you.
Ms. Reed.
Jackie, forgive me for going back again to your own experience, but I think that we have this to draw on because you're kind of a testimonial, and you have said that your children flourished. And did your husband flourish? Did he find that he had perhaps was he a psychologist or a psychiatrist?
He is a psychiatric social worker.
Psychiatric social worker. Did he find that he perhaps had a little trouble adjusting to your change of rules too?
Yes. When we got married, and everyone does, I guess, have an original kind of a contract that you may not even discuss, but you understand. And this is your role, and this is my role. And it worked for us for a long time, and we were really happy with it until I kept having babies and more babies to satisfy my need to create, I suppose. And when I got too old and decided that was enough, then I got involved in things outside the home because I couldn't have another baby to have something to do. And as I got involved outside the home, it was very threatening to him. I was breaking our original contract, and we fought a lot. And then we decided to go to marriage counseling and write a new contract, which we did. The new contract worked very well, and I asked for everything I wanted, he asked for everything he wanted, and then we negotiated on anything we couldn't agree on. And that contract worked very well for some time. Right now, we are not sure that we want to live together anymore. We've been married for 27 years, and they've been really great. Some really wonderful things have happened. But neither one of us are completely satisfied or even relatively satisfied with the way things are right now. I was 17 when I got married, and he was 21, and we had never lived alone in all our life. We lived with other people, and neither of us have ever really had a chance to find out what we can do on our own. And we both have a real need to do that, and we have separated. And I see it as a chance to grow and to find out what I can do for myself. My husband was a really neat person, and he is now. And I think he's going to make a good life for himself. And maybe someday our lives will come back together. And I'd kind of like that, and I think he would too. But first we have to find out what we can do on our own. It really is a drive that we never got a chance to do before.
I didn't mean to tap such a personal source, and I think you're marvelous to share this with us and with our viewers. And I think the question that you have brought up is the question that covers the country, the question of teenage marriages. And we are the only industrial country which still continues to have this high rate of teenage marriages. Do you have some comments?
Oh, I don't think it matters. I think people are getting married at 25 and 30 and getting separated when they're 45. You know, divorce rate is tremendous. They're not all teenagers. And I don't see it necessarily as a negative thing. It sometimes is a negative thing. It can have really devastating effects on one or both partners in a divorce or a separation. But it can be a positive thing. And so you have to figure out whether it's going to be positive or
well,
negative.
in terms of time for self-fulfillment, and you were saying you hadn't had a chance before to do some of the things that you found you were going to do.
Yeah, that's true for, I think, partly because we were teenagers. But mainly I think it's because the original contract is no longer valid. And it happens for lots of people. The original contract just wears out. And if you can't replace that contract with a workable contract, then you know, maybe you just can't live together anymore.
Mr. Brown.
Changing it rather dramatically, quite often you hear a debate in women's groups concerning volunteerism. That is, there's a very active group now that says women should not be volunteers anymore. They've done that for hundreds of years, and that they are very much against women doing volunteer work. And then other women who are also active in the feminist movement will say no, that proper use of volunteer labor is not bad. Have you faced this yourself? I know you've done volunteer work, but how do you feel about that now?
I really have two feelings about it. I think whenever you do volunteer work, you're taking responsibility that ought to be placed on all the population and not just on a few people that are willing or able to do a little volunteer work. And volunteers are taking people for doctor's appointments, elderly people or people like that, to doctor's appointments. This society should provide for older people to get to the doctor's office without having to depend on volunteers. Volunteers are taking care of people who are sick or are indigent, and that's the responsibility of the entire population. And so for that reason, I'm against volunteerism. But on the other hand, I think it's a good place for women to start and to feel their wings if they haven't tried something before.
I wonder, do you see a difference between volunteerism, the gray lady, the hospital person, the senior citizen helper, and something like League of Women Voters or AAUW, groups that try to make substantive changes in society? Do you see a difference for yourself, say?
Oh, I really like the League of Women Voters, and I don't think of them quite as volunteers somehow. I think of them more as activists. The gray ladies in the hospital I think of as volunteers, and I think they ought to be paid. I think they're worth it.
Yeah, I want to pursue out the League, because that is, it's from what I'm reading, that is becoming quite a dispute. Ms. Magazine had an article last month, I think, on this type of thing, volunteerism, and they extended it to things like League, when League does like voter service work and this type of thing, that type of the candidates fair, the volunteerism where they try to bring the public and to meet the candidates and this type of thing.
Yeah, well, I guess I agree that that's a really worthwhile thing, and it's not quite the same as volunteering to me. Maybe I'll change my mind. I don't stay the same all the time.
Good.
Ms. Spaggi.
I'm going to change the subject back again to along the lines of what Mary Lou was talking about, and you were talking about that 27 years ago you and your husband entered marriage with a contract, a probably unspoken contract is what you expected from each other. Do you feel that the people that are getting married today are entering into marriage with different ideas, with different contracts? And
Yes, I do.
how is it different?
I think they're making contracts that are more reasonable and easier to live by. A lot of young people are. For one thing, women aren't promising to obey anymore, I understand. And I've been to a couple of weddings that some of my college classmates have had, and have just been really impressed with the services, and they're getting married out in the woods under the trees and in different kinds of costumes, and it's a whole different kind of atmosphere, and I think it's much healthier.
How do you think the men are reacting to this? Is there an antagonism, or are the men feeling good about this also? Do they feel like they're being forced into this?
I don't know how men are feeling about it. Do you mean the men who are getting married?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I guess I assumed that they were feeling that it was more honest and that they were willing, and perhaps even felt better about it, just because it was more honest, I think.
I want to go to another question, but I just can't resist making one comment. That is, when you looked at me and you said, I don't know how men feel about it, I thought, well, I might try to answer that, but not being married, never being married, and not planning on the near future, I guess I wouldn't think seriously about it until then, but I would think with what philosophical views I have, that I think it is really an improvement for the whole chance of marriage to have a chance to succeed if both of them really respect and consider one another equal and have all these understandings in advance. I think in all respects of life, that sometimes our confusion and lack of communication causes problems later. Now I would like to open a large can of worms. I am sure this is most controversial, and I'm just really anxious to get your viewpoints on it. I believe of all areas in which we are discussing the rights of women today, that the most controversial and is getting the largest publicity around the country and the world is the role of women in religion. And very recently, you know, the Episcopal Church and their refusal to allow women to reach the most important positions in their church has caused great controversy and attempts to even really throw certain priests out of the church because they're supportive of women. And while, before you answer that, I want to bring one more example forth. Dr. Billy Graham, who is certainly well known in more fundamental religious circles, was asked in Europe recently in an interview, would he support homosexuals being ordained to the priesthood or ministry, and women? And in responding to that question, although he said it was misunderstood, and at least his explanation is when he finally answered was that he would support homosexuals being ordained if they would ask forgiveness for their sins first, but he wouldn't answer how he felt about women. How would you respond to these undertakings going on in religion today? And do you feel that there should be changes in the organized religious dogmas concerning these matters?
I think the women in those churches are just going to insist on it. And I think churches will have to change. And I think some of them are already changing. And I'm amazed at some of the things that go on in churches nowadays. A minister invited me to come and see some films that he was going to show in marriage couples groups, and there were a lot of people there viewing them, and I looked at the films and thought, gee, I'd like to go call the police and say, listen, do you know they're showing pornography in the basement of the church? Because they were very sexual films, and he was really giving people permission to be sexual. I don't know about the ministers and all of that, because I'm not involved with any formal church, but I think if they're coming around to recognizing that sex is here to stay, that they're probably going to recognize that women are here to stay pretty soon too.
Ms. Reed.
I love that. That's marvelous. You have been associating with young people, obviously, both at home with your own children and then going back to school. Your orientation, you really have had an exposure to the youth culture. And where are your classmates at today? Do you find that they feel sort of a generation gap, or did that disappear a little bit when Vietnam was over? Are they conservative, or are they liberal? What are they worried about? What do they think about?
The school I go to at OSU is really very, very conservative. And I'm not finding very many political activists on campus. There are a few. But I think young people are exciting because they're just living different than I lived when I was young, or at least many, many of them are. But there's also a lot of students on campus that are living exactly the same way I did. And it's really hard for me to believe. But not all young people are active politically or are seeking any change in the world. They're just thinking about getting through school, getting a job, and making a lot of money, and getting married in a traditional way, and having traditional families, traditional children, a traditional house, and everything. And I taught a women's discussion group, and found that the 10 people in my group were not interested in changing the way men and women relate. They were satisfied with it.
In other words, this sort of much heralded concern for values, in which we were saying the young people really are caring about what matters. Perhaps the value systems that they're holding are just about the same as their parents?
For a lot of them, I think. I'm excited about the young people who are seeking change, but I don't think it's not all of them.
I want to get this question before the time's up, and then I'll go back to Mr. Brown, but I don't think we should pass on this one. In about a month, we're going to have a lady on this program who is from the Midwest, a state senator, the first one in her state since 1929, and she's coming to us to speak for 1 hour on campus and then be on this program, and she is touring the country, very opposed to the Equal Rights Amendment. So all women aren't speaking on the same side on these issues. And so since I know she's coming and going to be saying this, I want to give you this opportunity to give us your opinion on the Equal Rights Amendment and why you take the position you do.
Oh, I'm really strongly in favor of it, and I don't understand her. I just don't understand it at all. I don't know what to say about her, because I just can't understand why women would be opposed to it.
She's not been here yet, but from her literature, her contention is, I understand that she feels that the Equal Rights Amendment will bring some detrimental effects to women, that she contends they have some special privileges they're going to lose, and they'll find themselves in such situations as the draft, is her.
Why should women have special privileges? If you're going to enjoy equality, you have to have equal responsibility as well, including the draft. If the draft is revived, women should be drafted as well as men. I don't want to send my son over there to be killed, but it's no different than sending my daughter over there to be killed. I don't want either one of my kids to be sent over to a war to get killed. It doesn't make any difference what sex they are.
Mr. Brown.
An issue that's coming up in Idaho next year in the legislature will be changing the rape laws in Idaho. We presently have the rape laws, I'm sure you're familiar with, the ones that were in existence for hundreds of years, no change. And I believe that Oregon has recently changed their law.
Right.
Are you familiar enough with the law to perhaps comment on that?
That they have made it really precise. So there are certain questions you can't ask women. Lots of times after a rape, the woman is really the one on trial, and she can be asked if she is a virgin, if she's had sexual intercourse with anybody at all in the past ever, and what does that have to do with what's happening right now? And so they've made it so that they've made the law so that you can't ask the victim certain questions like that. And I couldn't quote it to you, but I like the law a lot, and I'm really pleased that you're going to have such a law.
Well, no, we got
Are
a
you
fight
going
to
to
get
work
such a
on
law.
it? That you're working on it.
I wondered, was there a fight in Oregon? Do you recall, did it pass easily? Do you recall?
I think it just passed really easily. It was a popular law.
Thank you.
Ms. Fedge.
Keeping in mind that absolute power corrupts absolutely, if you believe that, if you did have absolute power, what kinds of changes would you like to see made in regard to women and their roles and men and their roles and their interactions? This is your ideal world.
I don't think, I would like men and women to get together and talk and discuss it and find out what this world is really about and what we really want to do with it, and let each man and each woman come to their own conclusion.
Ms. Reed.
How about the educational system? How do you feel that it is still tremendously oriented towards concept of male supremacy, the textbooks and everything else? Or are you seeing some change as you watch your children's education and as you go through your own?
I think the changes are really, really slow. And in my own classes, I've drawn attention to my teachers. Any sexist remarks in the book, the journalism textbook had a paragraph that said, when a man comes home from work, he is tired, he doesn't have time to read his paper, he sits down and reads the headlines, and you have to catch his eye really quickly, and doesn't even mention that a woman reads the paper at all. And I pointed this out to him. Oh, it also mentioned that the woman was nagging the husband, and that was another reason he didn't have time to read it. I pointed it out to my journalism teacher, and he said he hated it. But you know, he has to buy textbooks, and he couldn't find any non-sexist textbooks. He wants to. He's aware of it.
But how about the system at OSU? Are many of your professors women, and do they have comparable administrative jobs to men?
No, we have a new dean of education, which is a woman, the first woman as dean of education. And no, it's not equal.
How do you think that the educational system is going to be changed? Do you think you start with textbooks, or do you start with teacher training, or is this just a slow?
You can do it all at once, maybe.
But you think it's very slow?
Yes, I think it is. It takes a long time to make everyone aware and to convince everyone that it's good to have non-sexist education.
With that, I'm going to bring our program to conclusion. As is true so often on this program, we have many more things we want to pursue, but the time allowed us does not permit. On behalf of the panel, I want to thank you this evening for being with us. I know it's been an informative program to our audience, and I'm sure that we have stimulated debates within the home between those of different viewpoints, and I hope we have, because I think that's what education is all about, is a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I really did enjoy it.
Great. And I also thank our regular panel member and our visiting panel members for outstanding questions and taking time to be with us. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed our program and our guest this evening, talking about one of the most important topics and one of the most often discussed topics in America today. I want to invite you to be with us again next week when we'll be interviewing another personality of the United States at 6 o'clock on this same station. Good evening.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. The preceding student production was brought to you by Videotape Recording.